June or July of 1992, 5 p.m. Location, Southern Maryland. It was evening, and my family and I were coming back from a beach in Maryland from having dinner with my brother, mom, and dad. I was 15 and in the back right passenger seat chilling with my brother. Riding along, I'm just looking out the window, and there's a little road that merges onto the main road on the left. So, as we merge, we pick up a little speed. We are going maybe 25 to 30 miles an hour, and you have to cross this little bridge, and it's really bumpy. So we slowed more to maybe 20 miles an hour. Once we did that, I look up ahead, and about 75 yards ahead, I see something standing on the wood edge off to the right just a little. But it was exactly at the edge of the woods. It had both arms on a tree just standing there, meaning its right arm was on a tree about shoulder height and its left arm was on a tree at about shoulder height. So its arms were basically spread out with its hands on the trees. It was about 7 feet tall, and maybe even taller. It had a wolf-looking face, only larger, like a dire wolf from Game of Thrones. It had really broad shoulders and very muscular arms, a large barrel chest, and it narrowed the rest of the way down to the abdominal area. It was dark brown and the hair was only medium in length. I didn't get a great look at the legs because it locked eyes with me. It knew I saw it and it saw me. I saw it a good distance up ahead and was like, what the hell is that thing standing at the wood edge? Soon as I said that to myself, I locked eyes with it, and I saw it for a good 10 to 15 seconds because of how far up ahead I first noticed it moving around and how slow we were traveling. Its eyes followed mine the entire time. It took my breath when I first realized what I was looking at, and my first thought was, God, that thing is ugly. It had very pointy features, and it didn't look like a Bigfoot, but an actual werewolf. A lot of people call it a Dogman, but I'm more inclined to say that this was an actual wolf man. I said out loud to my family, "Did you guys see that thing?" But obviously, they were like, "See what?" Another thing, this was in Southern Maryland where there are no bears or other large animals. But I asked my family over and over if they saw it, and then they just started getting annoyed with me. I told people over the years, but I was only ridiculed and teased about it, so I just stopped. So that's my encounter. My family still doesn't believe me either, and most people think I'm crazy or lying, so I very rarely tell anyone about it. But it was real, and it was there. I just want to know the W's of the creature. Where, what, why, etc. Hi, my name is Richard L., and I live in a little town by the name of Almond, located in Wisconsin. I don't have any degrees or PhDs. I'm just a retired simple man that likes going out in the woods and do some plant studies on my own. I know a little study about botany, and I enjoy its study, that's all. I like to consider myself a man of science, though, and I tend to look for explanations for every little thing. But what happened to me a few days ago on one of my short trips that I can't explain, I wonder if you could shed some light to the subject. My family doesn't believe me, and please excuse my writing and grammar as I am not the best at it. That day, I went out earlier than usual in the morning. It was 5 a.m. when I grabbed my backpack, consisting of one sandwich, botanical books, a notebook, and a pencil. I like carrying my shotgun as well, even though it gets pretty uncomfortable after a while, but I do bring it with me every time I go out to the woods. My day was pretty productive. I drew a few plants on my notebook, but it was after 8 a.m. that I realized I forgot to bring water with me. That was a huge mistake. I know of a little source of water, a spring nearby that carries clean, drinkable water, so I decided to go there. And once I reached that spring, I was relieved to see the clean water throwing fluid. I left my backpack on the ground and bent over to drink some of it off my hands. I was very thirsty and drank as much as I could. As I stepped back from the water and reached for my backpack, I heard a strange sound that reminded me of a howl. Only it sounded like a creature in pain and not like a wolf trying to communicate. I didn't pay much attention to it, since you can hear about anything here in the woods if you concentrate hard enough. So I decided to head back home. On my way back, I began to think, what if that howl was actually a person asking for help? What if I ignored the cries of a human being just trying to be heard? That's what made me go back to the spring. I started blaming myself for not having enough thought about this earlier and thinking about how that person could be dead by now. It could be a hunter or even an old person. When I got to the spring, I stayed still nearby trying to hear the sound again. I screamed out asking to see if anybody was there. I went around the spring in circles looking for this person, hoping to find someone laying on the floor. I was kind of relieved. Maybe, after all, it was just an animal howling or some tree branch making a funny cracking noise. I called again, just in case. Nothing. Not a sound. Only the water flowing down the rocks. I became hungry, so I sat down next to the water to eat the sandwich. Again, kind of relieved that it had all been a false alarm. But it hadn't been a false alarm. I dropped half of my sandwich on the water. The howl happened again. And only this time it was more of a human cry. No doubt it was a male human crying out loud. An adult, a very loud cry. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I started running towards the sound. "Hold on, I'm coming. Are you okay?" All I could see was the branches of bushes and trees hitting me on the sides of the face and scratching my arms. And then I saw it. It was there, sitting down in the middle of an opening. A human figure. He then started moving fast, movement that I have never seen in a human. Almost like spasms, only faster, shakier. I realized it wasn't a he, but an it. It stood on its hind legs, and I could see the outside of the body was hairless, like a human, whereas the inside was hairy, like an animal. It was silver hair, white, its chest full of it. No sexual organs anywhere. The head started to take shape, and it had two distinctive wolf-like ears and a long snout. Long canines showing on the sides, up and down, like a hog. The eyes were brown or black, very dark. It then growled, and I have to admit I was freaked out by then. I reached for my shotgun, not to shoot it, but to scare it away with a shot in the air. And when I realized I had left it back at the water spring, I was defenseless, standing next to a creature I had never seen before. I thought if I started running, it would chase me down, so I stood still, quiet, trying not to stare into its eyes so it wouldn't find me challenging as dogs often do. That's when it approached me, close enough to smell it. It put its snout up on my head and sniffed my eyes and nose. Its eyes connected with mine, and I wasn't able to gaze away this time. I could feel its pain. That creature was in pain, but also you could feel its anger. I couldn't stand it anymore, and I started screaming. It then left running on four legs. I urinated my pants, literally. I did. I was surprised it had not tail, and the rear end looked like a human butt, to be honest. I stood there for a few moments, making sure it had left for good. Then I went back to my backpack and shotgun and headed home. It was the weirdest day of my life. Do you have any ideas as to what creature this was? My first encounter happened late at night, while driving home to Snohomish from Sultan, the two towns being about 10 miles apart. I was with my mother, and we had just finished dropping a friend off at her home in Sultan. It was late October, and there was an unusual storm going on that night, and everyone talked about the following day. Tremendous cloud-to-cloud lightning and a very cold, dry wind with no rain. Bright flashes of light, loud thunder, and lots of leaves blowing around. After dropping our friend off, we were on a stretch of the road that's very dark, with farmland on either side of the highway, Highway 2 for those who are curious, and both sides having densely wooded hills. We were driving a 1991 Honda Accord, and this one particular spot in the road, something caught my eye. Off to the left side, which was a farm field, and there was a break in the guardrail for a dirt road going into the field. Right when we were even to this break, I saw what looked like a huge dog coming up. And right then, it ran in front of our car, and I hit it. We could see the top of its back, which we both swear looked more like a hyena at this point than a dog. It had to be huge to see its back over the hood of the car when you're sitting pretty low to the ground in a Honda Accord. Its fur was shaggy brown and molted with dark spots just like a hyena, and its front seemed higher up than its back. The headlights lit it up as it ran in front of our car, and we could feel it get hit, but didn't see it go either up in the air or off to the right side of the car. It was running from the left side of the highway to the right. We were driving westward, and it set my car into an uncontrollable swerve back and forth into the oncoming lane, and I just prayed that I can get it under control. To keep from getting into a head-on-head collision with what looked like maybe a Ford Aerostar van, a calmness came over me, and I felt like my guardian angel had taken control of the steering wheel because we missed the van by just a few inches. After going a little ways further, we were both so shook up I pulled off to the side. My mother wanted to go look for the dog because we both love animals and felt bad about hitting something. But I had a bad feeling about looking for this dog because it had looked so strange and I was afraid of it. It was dark and stormy and it didn't feel safe and I just wanted to get home. We got back in the car and stopped at a little gas station when we first got into Monroe, which is the next town between our town and Sultan. We got out to look at the front of my car, thinking surely there would be some evidence of hitting something that large. We were going the highway speed when we hit it, which is like 60 miles an hour. Like a dent, some fur or blood, but there was nothing there. Not a scratch. The whole thing had a very supernatural feel to it. The look of this dog, which was huge and looked more like a hyena, just didn't seem right at all. Neither did the timing of it running in front of us like that. It wanted to make us stop on the dark stretch of road and get out of my car, which we did, but we got right back in. I never saw it on two legs, and it ran on all fours, but there was something so calculated about the way it came up to the highway and looked at our car and ran in front of it. It seemed planned. It was such a strange electromagnetic type of storm that night, too. The next day, people we knew that lived miles and miles apart in many different directions all talked about the storm and one particular loud thunderclap that shook everyone's homes. They all thought it was directly over their houses, but they were all miles apart. I have 3 more encounters which occurred after this one, and I'm pretty sure this happened in roughly October of 1997 and no later than 1998. My stepdad lived in Virginia when he was around the age of 8. Right on the edge of the Great Dismal Swamp. According to him, he was in bed one night when the sky was cloudless, or just very bright. He never thought until recently whether the moon was shining or not, and saw a beast looking right through his window at him. He said he could see spittle running down its face, and its eyes were looking straight at him. It was supposedly standing on its hind legs and had cream, red, and brown colored matted fur and a face almost like a wolf. Other than its snout, its facial features were very human. Its jawbones were high, and the structure around its eyes and its eyes themselves were human-esque. The coloring of its eye, he believes, were yellow. The reason why I think this is interesting and possibly valid is because the Great Dismal Swamp covers a huge amount of territory and is hardly touched by humans. Only in recent years have people started to study its inhabitants. The grounds are wet, mossy, and absorb sound, and people have been known to wander into it and never return. Who knows what could be lurking in the unknown? Chills my bones. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that he crawled out of his bed and went straight to his mother's room. In the morning, when they looked around the house, all the windows had ground that was stirred up under them and grass that was yanked out. There were actual scratches in the wood under his window, and paint was missing too. However, as far as they could see, there were no discernible footprints of any kind. I was out at my grandparents' house, hunting coyotes, as usual, this time of year. I was hiking through my next-door neighbor's land, and to get the wood-covered land in the back, while I was hiking, I got the feeling I was being followed by something to my right. I stopped and switched the red tint on my headlamp to my spotlight, but didn't see anything. Then I switched back to my headlamp and pulled my rifle back and continued my hike. It was 6:15 a.m., and the sun was just coming up. I was sitting in a hide I'd made the day before, and that's when I saw something behind a group of trees on my left. It was crouched. I raised my rifle, looked through my scope, and froze when I saw the creature staring right back at me. I panicked and fired a shot off. That's when it stood up and took off, deeper into the woods. I sat there probably for like another 25 minutes before I decided it was safe to head in, and did so. Later that day, I grabbed my grandfather and we both went out to where I had seen the creature when it stood up on two legs and took off. We measured where I had seen it, and it was roughly 7.5 to 8 feet tall. To this day, I'm terrified to go out at night or in the early morning hours. Laugh at me. I really don't care. I don't know what I saw, but it looked like a cross between a guy and a wolf, and I kid you not. I was on my way home from work. It was maybe 10 minutes from the house, coming up a big hill. I suddenly got the strangest feeling, so I slowed down, thinking a deer was going to come out of the woods or something. I just felt like I was being watched or followed, and there were no cars in front of me or behind me. I got to the top of the hill and slammed on my brakes because as soon as I got to the top of the hill, this huge black hairy thing came bounding across the road. It was so big when it ran, its back arced up, kind of like a cheetah, but only a lot more than that. I know that if it would have stood up, it would have been well over 6 feet tall. I mean, gosh, maybe even taller. I also know another car saw it too, because when I hit the brakes, another car turned onto that road and slammed on their brakes too. We both just sat there for a few minutes, which is not really safe considering, I know, but we were both just in total shock. I truly have no idea what it was that I saw. It was not a dog or a horse. Dogs do not get that big, or even arch their backs like this thing did when it was running. The arms, legs, whatever it had were so long it was having to throw them out to the side. Think kind of like a crab walk just to run. And appendages it had were just as big as it was, and it ran from one side of the woods to the other non-stop, like it was either going after something or running away from something. I'd like to tell you about the encounter my son had, maybe 4 years ago. He told me about it then, but I had no clue. And now we have Dogman encounters, and now I know. Here's what happened. My son's friend was driving him home at about 11 p.m. through a rural residential area. The houses are spaced some distance apart. They were on a 2-lane highway, with no streetlights and very little traffic. The area is not overly wooded, but has patches of trees and fields. This area would probably be included in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. Anyway, they were driving along when suddenly, from the right side of the road, this thing sprang out and was across the road and into the bushes on the other side, in 2 leaps or bounds or steps, or however you want to say it. It was in full view because of their headlights. My son said the first thing he thought was dog. He went on to say that it was running on all fours like a deer, and he said it was the color of a deer with a huge dog head, massive shoulders, and a really small waist. He kept repeating how big it was, so I asked for a comparison. I asked if he meant huge like maybe a big deer, or was it maybe as tall as a cow? He answered, and I quote his answer, "Mom, this thing was massive. If we had hit it, the car would have gone underneath it and the body would have hit the windshield." I don't remember what kind of car it was, but it was about the size and the shape of one of those older Sentras. He said that neither he or his friend said anything for about 10 seconds, and then his friend had yelled, "Did you see that?" My son said yes, and they didn't say another word the rest of the way. My husband was on his way to work around 4 a.m. on a rural road, while rounding an S bend when his headlights hit a large, dark brown figure that was sitting about 30 feet off the road, watching the road. He described the figure as about 4 feet tall, sitting with legs bent out in front of it, wolf-like face and large pointed ears. Does not remember the eye shine, and it was leaning back on human-like arms. My husband immediately felt endangered and floored his vehicle's accelerator. Now, this man has no fear of humans, and I've known him for 30 years and have never seen him afraid of a natural being. He's hunted and fished since childhood. It took him a couple of years before he told me about this sighting. He said his first thought was that it can catch this car, rip me out, and eat me if it wants to. He was paranoid and had his hand on a swivel all that day. And still, to this day, he cannot drive past that location without feeling something. The second sighting occurred in 2010 and happened to a coworker. I noticed she was acting strangely whenever we talked about spooky things, so I asked her what was up, and she said, "Okay, don't think I'm crazy." Then she went on to tell me how one night she was driving home from a late second shift between midnight and 1 a.m., about 5 or so miles from where the first sighting occurred. She had to slow down to a near stop to turn onto a road that would take her home. And that's when she began to hear what sounded like running alongside her car. That's when she glanced out her driver's window and saw the most horrible face. Her first thought was, "Werewolf." She described it as being black and gray in color with large teeth. She said she didn't look again, but could hear it running next to her car until she reached 45 miles an hour. That's no joke on a back road. She was scared out of her wits. After arriving home, she ran to the door, dropped the keys, went inside, closed all the curtains, and did not sleep a wink that night. We're both nurses, and I've known her for about 7 years. She grew up in New York City and is not a storyteller. Neither of these people likes to talk about their sightings, and you could see a change in them when their encounters are brought up. I don't need to see one of these to believe them. I know they exist. I was hunting during doe season, to be exact, in the woods. I parked my truck on a side road in Washington County, but it was right on the border near Greene County. Anyway, I was in a tree stand looking for deer and heard a lot of rustling leaves near me. I then saw this wolf-like thing running on its hind legs. It stopped for a moment, sniffed the air, and then ran off. I sat in that tree stand for hours till the sun was high in the sky. Then I cautiously returned to my truck. I gave up hunting after this experience. I had been up all night at a friend's house in the town of Tribby, playing video games. I didn't want to sleep there, so I said goodbye and headed home. I knew my car was making a funny noise, but I thought surely I could get home. Well, I was driving down a long, dark stretch of highway with nothing but forest and a few sparse county houses. I was coming up to the top of a long hill when suddenly my car just stops pulling forward. The engine revved, but no gears would engage. My CV joint just went out, and I was hoping that wouldn't happen. Well, I had no way of getting it home, so I backed up down the road in neutral and off onto a side road. I thought about staying and sleeping in the car, but something told me not to do that. I had an eerie feeling of being watched, so I grabbed my video game case and my machete that I had made from a lawnmower blade and started walking. I kept noticing the feeling of being watched, and it felt like I was being followed too. I kept looking behind me and saw nothing, but when a car passed by, heading in the direction behind me, it illuminated the area its headlights, and I saw something behind me in the ditch, hunched down low. It was huge, and I could tell it looked animal, but had humanoid features. It seemed to have arms, but its head was most definitely canine-ish. Its head was very large, and its eyes glowed red when the lights hit them. Well, I've seen enough werewolf movies to know that this wasn't a good situation, so I started running. That probably wasn't the best choice, because I know that predators like to chase things that run from them. When the car had passed, the creature had darted into the trees. I thought that was the best time to run, so I did. I ran for about a quarter mile and looked back, but I didn't see anything. So I kept walking. Well, I kept checking behind me and off to the side where the tree line was. I knew it was still out there and probably following me, and yeah, I was afraid, but I also was prepared to defend myself with my machete if need be. I came up onto another dirt hill and saw a farmhouse off in the distance. To my left, down a long, dirt driveway. The moon was almost full and the area around the house was clear, so I could see a guy out there messing with his truck as I walked by. Then he turned on a spotlight on his truck and spotted me with it. I kept walking because his property said no trespassing, and many out there wouldn't hesitate to unload on a strange trespasser. I knew it was close again, possibly closer now, and I was about to turn around and face it when another car came over the top of the hill and passed by me, going behind me again. I followed with my eyes and noticed this time it was a cop, so thinking quickly, I dropped my machete on the edge of the grass and waved. As he passed, his lights hit the ditch as well, and I saw the Dogman was very close, but it darted into the trees again. When the light hit it, thankfully, a moment later the cop stopped and turned around. He came back and asked me what I was doing out there, so I told him what had happened with my car. I didn't mention the Dogman, though. He may have thought I was crazy, but I asked him for a ride home. He agreed after wanting to go check and make sure my car wasn't blocking the road. After we checked it, he agreed to take me home. I don't know what might have happened that night if he hadn't shown up, and it was the only time I was genuinely happy to see a police officer.